So on this channel, we like to think about different ways that we can build watch collections with a variety of different strategies. But one thing I like to do is build parameters and kind of restrictions around a collection, because I know when it comes to people out there, there's different philosophies, and ultimately when it comes to budget, there's just limitations that come with watch collecting. So with this video, what I want to do is look at how could you build a watch collection with just trying to pick out 3 great watches that cover pretty much every scenario. And now there are a variety of ways to think about 3 watches that cover every scenario, but for myself, this is what I would consider it. So we're gonna have a dress category, something a little bit more office oriented, or for those scenarios when you have to wear something a bit more formal. Then you have your sports category, which is going to be some type of complication, or is going to be something of a diver that is going to allow you to have maximum versatility in more sporty types of environments where you really need to push your watch to the limit. And then to have another additional add-on to that, I have a beater in some instances, because we're looking at 6 different price ranges. Calling some of these a beater is probably a stretch, but just a watch that's going to be a smaller percentage of our total budget, but it is going to be able to pretty much take a beating no matter what you throw in its direction. So for our price categories here, we have 6 different ones we're going to look at, and just remember that this is the total amount for all the watches and their prices combined. We're looking at retail prices here, nothing that's discontinued, so new watches, and then also having that be the total. So when I say the first one, think about adding all the prices together to equal that total amount. So not to be confused with each watch is worth this amount of money. So first we have under $1,000, then we have $2,500 as our second category, move up to $5,000, then we have $10,000, then we have our $25,000 range, and then to round it out, we have our unlimited budget, stretch where money is no issue whatsoever. So 2022 has been an amazing year for watch releases. 2 of my favorites this year that I also want to highlight, available on TeddyBaldassarre.com, one being the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical in titanium. These watches are simply fantastic. To get the Hamilton DNA in a field watch in a titanium case, it's lightweight, so you get that, I would say, just the effortless feel that you want from a field watch. But also from there, sapphire crystal. This one also has 100 meters of water resistance, which is a nice step up from the mechanical models in that entry-level format. When you're talking about only 50 meters, you have to go for the auto for 100 meters. And you get a few different dial colors to choose in that 38 millimeter size, which would be the one that I would personally go for. You have black, you have green, which is very different compared to the traditional format. And then you also have the concrete version with the black PVD case. Another model I also mentioned is going to be the Tissot 1938 Telemeter. This is a watch that looks back to the 1930s archive of Tissot and infuses a value movement on the inside, and coming in a price range under $2,000 for a Swiss-made chronograph. One of the most attainable options you're going to find. Also, if you like just 1930s telemeter style, and telemeters are pretty cool complications in terms of timing different events, something to both be seen and heard. An example is lightning. So once you would see the lightning, you get the chronograph going, and then once you hear the thunder, that would tell you how far away that specific strike of lightning was. 2 different dial colors to choose from. You have the more blackish green hued dial that is very classic 1930s telemeter, and then you have the white silver dial with something that's a little bit more contemporary in its approach and not so vintage in its aesthetic. Check them out both on TeddyBaldassarre.com. So for our first price category here, we have under $1,000. I know you could probably go even cheaper on watches here, and I would definitely say that there's some great options to do so. But I wanted to start out here because I think this still gives us a nice budget, and we're talking about 3 watches, and they all have to total be under $1,000. For our first one, for the dress category, I want to look at the Orient Bambino at 38 millimeters. So this is a new release for 2022, long awaited. The Bambino has been on the market for 10 years. To finally see this watch now and available in this size is great, but long overdue to say the least. 38 millimeters in terms of its diameter, thickness of 12.4 millimeters, and a compact lug to lug of 44 millimeters, making it wear very true to that 38 millimeter size. Automatic F6724 movement on the inside with great ranges of deviation in terms of every single one I've tested. These are running really solid out of the box compared to some entry-level Seikos and other Citizen watches out there using those Miyota 8 series movements. These watches are more expensive than previous iterations, and if you have not seen what has happened with Orient prices, just be aware that the prices have gone up about 20% across the board, at least in the United States. So this is something that they're doing. I think parts have become a bit more expensive with what's going on in the world. So that is one thing to keep in mind, but even for around $250, it's a very hard to beat proposition for a dress watch. Now for our sports category, this is where I want to stretch a little bit more. And I think for where this watch falls, it is absolutely phenomenal. And this is the new lineup of watches from Seiko with the SSK 001, 003, and 005, also known as the Seiko 5 GMTs. These are simply amazing. I think these watches, in terms of when they were released, it's just one of those things where you know when someone strikes gold. Seiko struck gold with these watches. The fact that they were able to roll out this new movement with these watches, it almost just flipped the scale on what an affordable GMT can now be because of this. It's great to see some new availability for GMT watches under $1,000. Typically, when you're looking at GMTs in this price range, you're looking at for somebody that's doing something with quartz, or you have to spend much more to get into some of those entry-level GMT alternatives from Sellita with some of their offerings, as well as ETA, which is going to come way above $1,000 in many instances. 42.5 millimeter case, so pretty conventional Seiko 5 Sports case, 13.6 millimeters in thickness, which is pretty good considered the water resistance of 100 meters and getting a GMT movement on the inside. And then on top, you have a mineral crystal with a variety of dial colors and bezel options to choose from. And then to round it off with our beater watch, we have the Casio Duro. So the Casio Duro is a watch I've mentioned on this channel many times. I think it's a great gateway drug for people trying to get their first watch under $100 just to test the waters of what's available to you. But unlike a lot of watches in this price range, this watch just feels more expensive than it is. It's $60, so you can't expect the world of the thing, but it does provide a bit more than what you're expecting. And the expectations are low, but it far exceeds that when you're talking about this price category. 200 meters of water resistance, going to wear much smaller than the 44 millimeter case with the 48 millimeter lug to lug. I'd say wears closer to a 41.5 to 42 millimeter watch, all things considered. Casio quartz caliber on the inside, mineral crystal on top. Also some different variety in terms of the styles that you have here. The one that we're looking at here is the Kermit version, I'll call it. Black dial, green bezel, pretty sharp, get lost in the different styles, but if you just want a beater under $100, can't get much better outside of maybe a G-Shock than the Casio Duro. For our next category here, we have $2,500, and to begin with our dress watch, we have the Seiko SPB 113. So if you're not familiar with this watch, don't be thinking that you're out of the loop, because this is not a watch that gets mentioned very often, but one to me that is worth knowing about, partially because, actually mostly because, of the dial. So this is an enamel dial that you're getting for a watch, and for this price range, very remarkable to see that being done here. Now, is this the best enameling you're ever going to see? Absolutely not, but it's still enameling, and that process is something that is tedious to do, a lot of trial and error in terms of getting the right effect to it and coming through that heating process to make sure the dial comes into one complete whole. So to see this in a price range right above $1,000 is very, very intriguing. 39.9 millimeter case, 12.4 millimeter thickness, and a lug to lug of 47.2 millimeters. Also getting 100 meters of water resistance in the process, and the 6R35 movement on the inside with that 70-hour power reserve. Next up for our sports watch, we have probably one of the leading dive watches in the price category, and that is with the Mito Ocean Star Tribute. So if you're familiar with Mito, you know they have many different sports watches underneath the Ocean Star collection. This is going to be the more heritage-inspired design from that kind of 1960s feel. You have the lollipop, secondhand, the pops of color. It's a little bit more playful in terms of its design style. You have the blunt style hands, and just being a little bit more playful overall compared to some of the other offerings from the brand. But in its total package is still incredibly well done. I think Mito makes a leading dive watch in this $1,000 price range without question. So this is a little bit smaller as well, which makes this great for smaller wrists looking into the direction of Mito. 40.5 millimeters in terms of the case size, thickness of 13.7 millimeters. Some of that coming from that box sapphire crystal, which is much more pronounced on this compared to some of the other variants that have more of a flat sapphire with double AR coating. And then you have 46.6 millimeters on that lug to lug, making this one wear smaller than the case size. I'd say either a 39.5 to 40 millimeter case, also getting an 80-hour power reserve movement on the inside, and now with a few different options to go for. And one other thing I'll mention about this watch is the bracelet. Bracelet is simply phenomenal. It's like this fine mesh style bracelet, but also the clasp. Sure, it is going to get scratched up, but it is awesome for the on-the-fly adjustment. So this is where I would say brands could get a little bit more creative, and I think Mito's done a nice job with just utilizing an on-the-fly adjustment. Maybe it's not as premium as something like the T-Fit you're gonna find for $2,000 more, but very well done in its own like, so that you can adjust those small little details on the bracelet on the fly without tools. And then for our beater, we have the CasiOak, the GM2100 1A. So this is going to be the steel case variant with the resin strap. Then you also have the metal bracelet versions as well, which have been incredibly well received to go along with these. This is gonna save you quite a bit of money though in the process. You're talking about $200 here, which is great for our budget. 44 millimeters in terms of the case diameter, but gonna wear smaller than that. I'd say these wear closer to a 42 millimeter watch, all things considered, when you factor in the top to bottom measurement of 49.3 millimeters, 200 meters of water resistance, reliable course movement on the inside. These are robust. It gets you an elevated feel in the CasiOak DNA, and I just think these look simply phenomenal. I think they knocked it out of the park with these. Moving up to $5,000 for the price category, we have our dress watch here. We're gonna go for the Longines Dolce Vita. Dress watches in this price range between $1,000 to $2,000, there's certainly some, but I will say that there's many good ones on the affordable end, and then as you get up to $2,000, you see a kind of flurry of new available options to you. But this one falls right in that sweet spot between the $1,000 and $2,000 price range, and also does something a bit different compared to a lot of the watches in the category and doing it well, which is going to have that rectangular case. This watch is an adaptation and almost a recreation of some of their older models from the 1930s, but also infusing design styles from some of their other watches, like the Sector, that is now becoming another fixture within the modern heritage collection. You can kind of see that within this design. 27.7 millimeters on the case width, but then 43.8 millimeters on that lug-to-lug height, making this one wear closer to, I would say, 38 millimeter circular case equivalent if I had to put a number to it. Reliable movement on the inside, 30 meters of water resistance, but sharp, not gonna be overbearing in its wear, and very elegant on the wrist, and one of the better representations of a watch of this style with a rectangular case in the price range. For our sports category, let's stick with this heritage style here and go for the Oris Divers 65. So wide variety of different options to choose from with the Diver 65. Now this watch certainly leans into the retro inspiration, looking back to the 1960s, hence the name. 100 meters of water resistance being the one talking point of this watch over and over again, but it still qualifies for that 6425 standard of ISO compliance here, so I would say it is certainly still a dive watch and compatible, but maybe not to the same level of spec of that of the Aquis, but it has this retro charm that makes it unique in the price range. Different case sizes to choose from. The 40 millimeter probably going to be the most mass appealing. Nice box sapphire crystal with an aluminum insert on the outside and a reliable Sellita caliber ticking within. So we had some more money left over than some of the other categories, at least from a percentage basis. So we could stretch this out a tad bit more here. Here we have the Ball Fireman Enterprise, the entry-level option from Ball in their kind of more robust everyday style watches. So that's exactly what this watch is. So some people are pretty hit or miss on Ball, some people just can't get into them, and I totally understand why. They have a bit of their own kind of distinct design heritage. You have the railroad connection and their contributions to the United States Railroad in the early 20th century. But also you have their use of tritium, which can be much at times. The Fireman Enterprise is the entry-level package, which makes the price a bit more compelling compared to some of their other offerings, while getting some of the robustness with sapphire crystal, 100 meters of water resistance, nice bracelet, but also the tritium is died down. You have these more slim tritium tubes on this watch. Very wearable, 40 millimeter case, 48.5 millimeters on that lug to lug, going to wear pretty true to the size, if not slightly larger. Water resistance of 100 meters as mentioned, which is great to see in a watch of this category. And the thing I like about this watch is it has the ability to be beaten up a bit, but also isn't going to stray so far into that direction like some of their watches that are just a little bit much when it comes to maybe overstating the idea that, hey, we're trying to make this tool-oriented watch. This is more muted in that approach, and it allows it to be more versatile as an end result. Now moving up to the $10,000 category, we have our dress watch here, which is the Nomos Orion 35 millimeters. So this is the watch that I have owned for, I believe, over 6 years now. It was in the first video on this channel. I believe it was the thumbnail in the first video on this channel. And it's a watch that I will absolutely stand by and just recommend to many people looking for a dress watch with this specific budget. Nomos to me makes some of the best dress watches for the money on the market. For myself, I like the Orion of the dress watch trio from the brand just because of the raised markers and the pops of color with the blue hands in this instance and those gold applied markers on the outside for the hours. It's just a really sharp looking watch. It's minimalist. Some people will call it sterile, but if you just want a do-it-all style watch from a dress perspective that looks both contemporary but also classic, That's why I think the Orion is just such a cool watch. 35 millimeters, 7.4 millimeters on the thickness, so really thin, and that is thanks to the alpha manual movement on the inside, made in-house by Nomos, made to resemble the Pizou 7001 ETA movement that Nomos had to produce in-house as a byproduct of not being able to get access to these movements to the degree to match their production. Also here, you're looking at an extended lug-to-lug of 45 millimeters, pretty long for a 35 millimeter watch, one of the longest you're going to come across. So this makes it wear like a 37 to 38 millimeter watch when on wrist. So keep that in mind when looking at these different style watches. And I'd recommend going for the sapphire back because I think the alpha manual movement is a really sharp looking movement for under $3,000. Now for the sports watch here, I want this to be the fixture of our collection. I think this would also be what I would recommend for a lot of people out there. They're looking to get that maybe say first true luxury watch that can just do everything. What would you consider while keeping my entire budget with 3 watches under $10,000? I'd go for the Omega Seamaster Diver 300. Maybe not for me personally. This isn't my favorite watch that Omega makes in this price range, but if I'm talking about what works for so many people and is just a no-brainer choice, the Seamaster Diver 300 is exactly that. You have the Pierce Brosnan era, GoldenEye, and just the lineage of that, and almost being the watch in the last 30 years that you could say is maybe the most important for Omega. Of course, people will mention the Speedmaster. That is going to be the icon that I associate with Omega first, but the last 30 years, the Seamaster Diver 300 is, I would say, as iconic as it comes from the brand, and that's really thanks to the James Bond connection and just some great watches that were produced underneath this umbrella. 42 millimeter case, thickness of 13.5 millimeters, lug to lug of 49.7 millimeters, making it wear pretty true to size, but also maybe slightly smaller. The helium escape valve is the oddball here when it comes to the wearability of it because it does visibly look a little bit more wide across the wrist with that, but top to bottom, not crazy overbearing here for its size. 300 meters of water resistance and a coaxial movement, master chronometer certified movement on the inside, the Omega 8800. This is the single barrel 60-hour power reserve, but able to withstand 15,000 Gauss, range of deviation in terms of accuracy to 0 to +5 seconds a day. It's a wonderful movement, robust, and I think people sleep on the machine finish movements from Omega. These 8800 calibers, they're nice to look at. The spiral wave on the bridges and the rotor, they're just nice, no nonsense movements, and kind of set that standard for what a watch in this price range should look like from the back and then also from the front with that laser engraved dial. Simply great all around. And now for our beater here, and this is a pretty nice beater. This is where I'm saying that saying this is a beater is kind of a little bit ridiculous, so just keep all of that with a grain of salt when I say this. It's just for classification. We have the Zin 103. Now this is one of the more robust chronograph watches you're going to find in the price range. I'm going to mention the acrylic version here because that saves us a bit more money and keeps us safely in our price range. 41 millimeters with the case size, thickness of 15.9 millimeters, lug to lug of 47 millimeters, so going to wear smaller than what that case size is going to indicate. So think something like the Zin 104, adapting to that with a chronograph case, except it will be much thicker on the wrist. The acrylic is going to add to some of that thickness so you don't feel all of it in wear. Think more of like around a 14.5 millimeter case size in terms of actual wear on the wrist. That's more going to be in alignment to where you're going to actually feel this. Valjoux 7750 on the inside, but traditional pilot style watch from Zin. And if you know the lineage of this brand with Helmut Zinn being a flight instructor in Germany when he founded the brand in the 1960s, you know that this is such an integral part of their DNA in pilot watch design. Now moving up to the $25,000 price category, looking at 3 watches here. We'll start again with the dress category, and we have the Cartier tank, Louis. There are many different Cartier tanks, and there are many good Cartier tanks, but if I had to pick the Cartier tank for me, this would absolutely be the one. This is the watch that I would say strongly resembles that 1917 original design, the design that I would say embodies much of the 20th century design language from Cartier and their tanks. Also paying homage to Louis Cartier, the creator of this design language from 1917. It's just a classic watch. Precious metal case, slim on the wrist with that 6.6 millimeters in thickness, 25.5 millimeters in diameter, and 33.7 millimeters on that lug to lug. This is definitely a smaller watch. Manual wound movement on the inside, MC 1917, but class personified with this watch. And for these watches, you have a few different metals to choose from the golds. Honestly, just pick your poison. These are all just fantastic to look at and a simple icon of watch design. Now we have our sports watch here, and I want a nice dichotomy with the very buttoned up appearance of the Cartier tank. And for that, I want something more eccentric, I want something more playful, and you can't really get a better combination of that than the Rolex Milgauss. With its design language that stems from the 1956 original, now looking at some new iterations with the Z Blue, this is in many ways the sleeper Rolex. There are a few Rolexes that I would classify in this category, but this one has the most feeling that like, hey, is this even a Rolex that I'm looking at? The lightning bolts, the strange colors of the crystal and some of the different variants, the dial colors, it is probably one of the more playful and just out of place type of Rolex watches, but in a good way when I say that. 40mm case, 13.5mm thickness, and a lug-to-lug of 49mm. It's not the most wearable of Rolex watches, but it does have this fun ability to still look great on a wide variety of wrists, just because you know the circumstances in which somebody would pull this off are very different than some of the other offerings. 100 meters of water resistance, automatic Rolex 3131 on the inside. And this is a watch that certainly needs some updates, but it's a watch whenever I see in somebody's wrist, I'm always just like, you know, hey, good for you, man. You're buying a Rolex for, it seems like, the right reasons. I've never just seen someone go for a Rolex because they want to get it for just the ability to say, hey, look at me, I'm wearing a Rolex. It's just because of the personal idea that, hey, I like this watch. And that's what I think is really cool about it. So to round out our budget, we don't have that much left over. I'm going to go with just a good do-it-all style watch, but also take the Milgauss and what it's going for, and then just drain it of any of the colorful attributes and just get down to the core of what it maybe is trying to do at a more attainable price. Look at the Tudor Ranger. I would say this is more in alignment with the Explorer, of course, but still some of those ideas are carried over here, and I think it's a nice middle ground of finding some good versatility and something you don't have to maybe care about as much, but still getting a lot of play in your collection. 39mm in the case size, thickness of 12mm, lug-to-lug of 47.7mm, and water resistance of 100 meters. Another great thing about this watch is going to be the movement on the inside, the MT5402. This is, when currently speaking of Tudor at the time of recording this video, the most attainable way to get into the MT family of calibers. COSC certified, 70-hour power reserve. These come at starting prices just below $3,000, so around $2,700 on a strap, and then $3,050 on a bracelet. And then for our final price category, we have the unlimited budget. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, let's live vicariously through this nice collection here. So to begin, we have our dress watch, and one of my personal favorites, we have the Lange 1 Moon Phase. This watch is just simply fantastic. Some are not going to like the asymmetry of this watch, but if you look into the details, and I'd recommend checking out my video where I really dove into the details of this watch, talking and giving 4 reasons why I think it might be the perfect contemporary dress watch. You get a better understanding of why, with asymmetry, it almost has this balance still to it. And it's why I think with negative space, all the different uses of complication, even as this watch scales, it still is able to uphold that nice element of balance and not feeling overly cluttered. And remembering that this is a 38.5mm watch, to have all of that be compact and well positioned in a case like this is very well done and not something that I think you should overlook. 10.2mm on the thickness here, lug-to-lug of 46.3mm, so wearing very true to that case size, maybe slightly larger because of the larger dial on this watch and what it takes up within the case. And then a manual L121.3 movement on the inside. 3/4 plate, beautiful finishing on that 3/4 plate. And then you have that exposed balance cock with the hand engraving on it that you'd see all the way up the ladder looking at some other high complication Zeitwerks and datagraphs. So this is pretty much all you need to have for a watch. And when I think of modern Lange, I know there are many people that will look to the 1999 release of the Datograph, but to me the Lange 1 is what I will always associate with the brand first, just because I think this was the first answer when they were resurged in 1994 and saying that they arrived and they're back on the scene, and it just is so much a part of German watchmaking in the past 30 years. So for sports watches in this price range of the unlimited, it's become the dominated idea where brands like Richard Mille and Patek Philippe with the Aquanaut and Nautilus, AP with the Royal Oak are the things that dominate the most. But I want to go for an independent brand because there are many people that are tired of being disrespected by some of these brands and paying these outrageous prices and these long waiting lists, where they just want, if they're going to spend this type of money, at least give me some type of a bespoke experience with interacting with a company that's not just making a ton of these and are going to just give it to me straight. And that's why I want to look at Chopik with the Antarctic. So this is a brand that, if you're not familiar with, pretty cool indie brand that is coming on the scene and been resurged in the last 10 years. The brand name actually goes back to the mid 19th century, but really much of the renaissance here has come in the last decade with many of these different iterations. If you've been familiar with the brand, sports watches are not something that was part of their DNA, but recently they started to dive into this world looking at this new Antarctic. But this is one that is well done, well received, and of course I think for those in the know are not going to be any surprise at talking about this watch. You're looking at a 40.5mm case, thickness of 10.6mm, water resistance of a very respectable 120 meters for its styling. Movement is also going to be a manufacturer caliber with the SXH5. Movement has 60-hour power reserve and really nice decoration as well. Beautifully finished, individual bridges for the wheels on the gear train and the full balance bridge, free sprung balance as well with a micro rotor. And for our final watch here, we have the IWC Aqua Timer. So again, this is where the ridiculousness of beater comes into play, where I think it's kind of silly, but just hear me out here. We're talking about an unlimited budget and must be nice to have this be your beater. This is the reference, the IW328802. This watch retails just under $6,000, and the Aqua Timers, I would say in terms of popularity within IWC's collection, don't get the amount of attention compared to, of course, their pilots, which no surprise there, but even things like the Portuguese are not going to be talked about as much in comparison as well, and maybe even the Portofino. I could maybe say that this is number 4 in the hierarchy from the brand in terms of a collection, when I do think these have quite a bit of charm to them. 42mm case in this instance, 14.1mm in thickness. Now, the big move here is how the external bezel works, and it's mechanically connected to the internal bezel to create a pretty novel effect with the setting of the elapsed time. These watches also were freshly updated in 2022 with an extended power reserve of 5 days on those movements. Here we have the IWC 32111. But all right, guys, that is my list looking at 6 different ways to build a 3-watch collection, variety of different price ranges. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. I know we've looked at this subject in the past, but I think it's always good to look at different ways that you can navigate this different type of idea. If you were going to build a 3-watch collection, which 3 watches would you choose and how much money would you be throwing at it? What's the logic behind trying to build that collection? I know other people would like to see how other people are thinking about this in the comments. I know for myself too, it's always just nice to see, what are people thinking about when trying to build a collection for themselves, because I think it's a good way to show your own personal touch and identity with the watches that you collect. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.